September 15th, 1940, 10:30 in the morning, Bentley Priory, England. Chief Marshal Hugh Dowling stood before a massive plotting table watching red markers advance across the map of southern England like a plague of locusts. 250 German bombers escorted by 600 fighters were crossing the English Channel in the largest daylight raid of the Battle of Britain. But something was different this time. The metal towers dotting the English coastline, those unsightly structures that Adolf Hitler had dismissed as British desperation, made visible, were providing advanced warning with mathematical precision. The radar operators called out ranges, bearings, and altitudes with clockwork accuracy. Hostile formations due sector 150 aircraft, Angels 20, course 310. What Hitler failed to understand when he mocked Britain's radio detection experiments in 1938 was that those crude towers represented the world's first integrated air defense system. While German intelligence dismissed radar as primitive British science fiction, the Royal Air Force was building an invisible wall that would transform aerial warfare forever. The Führer's contempt for British technology would prove catastrophic. By day's end, the Luftwaffe would lose 60 aircraft to British fighters guided by the very towers Hitler had ridiculed. The mathematics of detection were about to collide with the reality of surprise attack in the most decisive aerial battle in history. What began as Hitler's mockery of British radio towers would evolve into the complete destruction of German air superiority over Britain. The invisible shield had awakened, and the hunters were about to become the hunted. The origins of Hitler's radar contempt traced to his first intelligence briefings about British experiments in 1936, when German spies reported strange metal towers appearing along England's coast. Hitler's reaction was immediate dismissal. The British are building expensive monuments to their own desperation, Hitler told Hermann Göring during a meeting at the Burghof in July 1938. These radio towers prove they know we can destroy them from the air. Let them waste resources on fantasy defenses while we build real bombers. Göring, equally dismissive, reinforced Hitler's prejudice. The towers represent British fear. Mein Führer. They believe radio waves can detect aircraft. This is the same nation that couldn't defeat farmers in South Africa. Their science is as weak as their resolve. What German intelligence failed to comprehend was the revolutionary nature of Robert Watson Watt's research. Since 1935, British scientists had been developing radio detection and ranging, creating the world's first early warning network. By 1938, the Chain Home radar system comprised 20 stations covering Britain's eastern and southern approaches. Each radar station could detect aircraft at ranges exceeding 100 m, providing bearing, range, and approximate altitude. More importantly, the system was worked with all stations feeding information to Fighter Command headquarters at Bentley Priory. This centralized control allowed coordinated interception impossible under previous air defense methods. German aerial reconnaissance photographed the radar towers repeatedly throughout 1938 and 39. Luftwaffe intelligence analysts, following Hitler's lead, concluded the structures were defensive radio antennas, possibly for communicating with ships. The possibility that radio waves could detect aircraft seemed too fantastic for serious consideration. Major B.O. Schmid, chief of Luftwaffe intelligence, wrote in his assessment, British tower construction indicates awareness of German air superiority. These defensive installations suggest preparation for siege conditions rather than offensive capability. The towers pose no threat to our operations. This fundamental misunderstanding would prove fatal. While Germany developed superior aircraft and trained excellent pilots, Britain was constructing an invisible fortress that would neutralize German advantages through advanced warning and coordinated defense. The technology behind British radar represented scientific achievement that German leadership couldn't accept. Watson-Watt's team had solved the problem of radio wave reflection, creating transmitters powerful enough to detect aircraft at strategic distances while developing receivers sensitive enough to process the returning signals. Each chain home station transmitted radio pulses on frequencies between 20 to 30 megahertz. When these pulses struck metal aircraft, they reflected back to receiver towers positioned nearby. By measuring the time between transmission and reception, operators could calculate exact range. Direction finding equipment provided bearing, while signal strength indicated approximate altitude and formation size. The system's sophistication exceeded anything Germany possessed. While German scientists had conducted radar experiments, they focused on short-range applications for naval gunnery and aircraft detection at sea. The concept of long-range early warning for air defense had never been seriously pursued. German radar development, limited by Hitler's preference for offensive weapons, lagged years behind British achievements. The Würzburg radar, Germany's most advanced system by 1940, could detect aircraft only at ranges of 25 miles. Moreover, German radar operated as independent units rather thanked systems preventing coordinated defense. Flight Lieutenant James McLachlan, flying Hurricane patrols during the early war period, observed German bombers approaching without escort in broad daylight. They flew straight courses at predictable altitudes. McLachlan recorded in his combat diary, "Either they were supremely confident or they had no idea. We could see them coming from 100 m away." The German assumption that surprise remained possible over Britain reflected complete ignorance of radar capability. Luftwaffe bombers approached at cruising speed, maintaining formation integrity for bombing accuracy. They expected to achieve surprise through speed and altitude, never imagining that British fighters were already vectoring toward intercept positions before the German formations crossed the channel. Squadron leader Douglas Bader, commanding number 24. 2 Squadron, described the tactical advantage radar provided. "We knew exactly where Jerry was coming from, how many there were, and what altitude they were flying. We could position ourselves for perfect bounce attacks. They arrived, expecting surprise, and found Hurricanes and Spitfires waiting for them." The integrated nature of Britain's radar defense created unprecedented tactical coordination. Fighter command divided Britain into sectors, each containing multiple airfields and radar stations. When radar detected incoming formations, sector controllers scrambled appropriate numbers of fighters, vectoring them toward optimal intercept positions. This system allowed Britain to concentrate fighter strength against specific threats rather than maintaining standing patrols. German planners, expecting British fighters to be dispersed defensively, instead encountered concentrated opposition at the exact moment and location German formations were most vulnerable. By August 1940, as the Battle of Britain intensified, German losses began revealing the effectiveness of British radar. Yet, Hitler continued dismissing reports that blamed radar for Luftwaffe casualties. "German pilots are making excuses," he told his staff. "The British cannot predict our attacks through radio towers." Air Chief Marshal Dowings Fighter command comprised only 700 operational fighters in July 1940, facing Goering's force of 2,700 aircraft. Without radar coordination, this numerical disadvantage would have been insurmountable. With radar guidance, British fighters achieved tactical concentration that multiplied their effectiveness. The mathematics were stark. German formations detected at 100 mi range required 20 minutes to reach British targets. This provided sufficient time for British controllers to scramble fighters, vector them to intercept positions, and coordinate attacks that maximized damage while minimizing British losses. Radar's psychological impact on German aircrews proved as significant as tactical advantages. Luftwaffe pilots expecting to achieve surprise through speed and altitude instead found British fighters waiting at optimal attack positions. The knowledge that they were being tracked from the moment they left French airfields created stress and uncertainty that degraded performance. Obus Vera Milders, one of Germany's leading aces, reported to Goering after repeated encounters with perfectly positioned British fighters, "The enemy demonstrates uncanny ability to predict our approach, routes and timing. Their fighters appear exactly where they can inflict maximum damage. This suggests intelligence. Sources we have not identified." Goering dismissed such reports as pilot fatigue, refusing to accept that British technology could provide tactical advantage over German air superiority. This willful blindness to radar effectiveness would cost the Luftwaffe dearly as the Battle of Britain progressed. The September 15th raid that opened this account represented the climax of German frustration with unexpected British resistance. Goering had promised Hitler that sustained bombing would force Britain to surrender within weeks. Instead, Luftwaffe losses were mounting while British fighter strength remained surprisingly resilient. German intelligence estimated fighter command possessed only 300 operational aircraft by mid-September. In reality, radar-guided tactics had preserved British strength while inflicting unsustainable losses on German formations. The Luftwaffe was fighting an enemy they couldn't see, using methods they didn't understand. As the massive German formation approached the English coast on September 15th, radar stations from Rhe to Dover tracked their progress with mechanical precision. At Bentley Priory, controllers watched the plot develop with confidence born from 2 months of successful radar-guided interceptions. Hostile formations crossing in due sector reported the operations. Controller estimated 250 bombers with heavy fighter escort. All sectors scramble available aircraft. Vector blue, leader to intercept over Canterbury. Red, leader to Maidstone approach. What followed became known as Battle of Britain Day, the decisive engagement that broke German hopes for air superiority over Britain. British fighters guided by radar to optimal positions inflicted devastating losses on German formations expecting to achieve surprise. Squadron leader Brian Lane, commanding number 19 Squadron, recorded the tactical perfection radar coordination provided. "We climbed to position while control vetoed us precisely onto the German formation. We achieved perfect bounce from out of the sun, exactly as rehearsed. Jerry had no warning until our guns opened fire. The German formation flying in tight defensive boxes for mutual protection against unexpected fighter attacks found themselves under coordinated assault from multiple directions. British fighters positioned by radar guidance struck from optimal angles that maximized damage while minimizing exposure to defensive fire. Wing Commander John Peel leading the big and Hill Wing described the systematic destruction of German formations. Control placed us perfectly for each attack. We hit them from the sun, broke their formations, then reformed for follow-up attacks. The precision was surgical. Jerry couldn't adapt to tactics they couldn't predict. By day, and the Luftwaffe had lost 60 aircraft, including 26 bombers carrying trained crews Germany could not replace. British losses totaled 26 fighters, but most pilots survived to fight again. The mathematics of attrition were working against Germany. More devastating than material losses was the psychological impact on surviving German aircrews. They had encountered resistance that seemed to anticipate their every move, fighters that appeared from impossible positions and coordination that suggested British capabilities far beyond German estimates. Siegfried Bethge, surviving the September 15th raids, reported to intelligence officers, "The British fighters knew exactly where we were coming from and when we would arrive. They positioned themselves for perfect attacks. This is not luck or skill. This is advanced intelligence of our operations." German intelligence, still dismissing radar as impossible British propaganda, suggested British spies in France or security breaches in German planning. The possibility that radio towers could provide real-time aircraft detection remained too fantastic for acceptance. Hitler's reaction to September 15th losses reflected his complete misunderstanding of radar warfare. German pilots lack aggressive spirit. He told Goering, "The British cannot have superior technology. They are a decadent race incapable of scientific achievement. Our pilots must press attacks with greater determination." This refusal to acknowledge British technological superiority would prove fatal to German air operations over Britain. By continuing tactics based on obsolete assumptions about surprise and detection, the Luftwaffe was feeding aircraft into a defensive system designed to destroy them systematic. The radar advantage extended beyond mere detection to revolutionary tactical coordination. British controllers could track multiple German formations, simultaneously allocating fighter squadrons based on real-time threat assessment. This created optimal resource utilization impossible under previous air defense methods. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park, commanding No. 11 Group responsible for southeastern England, perfected radar-guided interception tactics that maximized fighter effectiveness. "We never met Jerry where he expected us," Park explained in post-war interviews. "Radar allowed us to choose engagement conditions that favored our aircraft and pilots." The psychological transformation of British pilots knowing they possessed invisible eyes watching for German approach created confidence that multiplied combat effectiveness. Fighter command pilots entered combat with tactical intelligence that eliminated surprise and uncertainty. Flight Lieutenant Al Dare, a New Zealand pilot with No. 54 Squadron, described radar's impact on pilot morale. Knowing control could see Jerry coming from 100 m away removed the fear of surprise. Tech. We approached combat with complete tactical awareness. This confidence was worth extra squadrons. German formations, conversely, flew into increasingly sophisticated traps that radar coordination made possible. British controllers could predict German approach routes, estimate arrival times, and position fighters for maximum tactical advantage. The hunters had become the hunted. By October 1940, German daylight bombing had become prohibitively expensive due to radar-guided fighter interception. Goering, finally acknowledging the failure of daylight operations, shifted to night bombing where radar provided less tactical advantage. But even this admission represented only partial recognition of British technological superiority. German leadership still believed radar was primitive defensive measure rather than revolutionary military technology that had transformed aerial warfare permanently. The Blitz night bombing campaign that followed represented German adaptation to radar reality without understanding radar science. By bombing under cover of darkness, German formations avoided radar G-guided fighter interception but sacrificed bombing accuracy and concentration of effort. Hitler never acknowledged that British radar had defeated German air superiority. Post-war interrogations revealed his continued belief that Luftwaffe failures resulted from pilot inadequacy rather than British technological advantage. This blindness to enemy innovation typified Nazi leadership's inability to adapt to military reality. Reichsmarschall Göring's post-war testimony at Nuremberg included grudging admission of British radar effectiveness. The English achieved surprise through detection methods we had not anticipated. Intelligence underestimated their technological capabilities. This disadvantage proved decisive in daylight operations over Britain. But even this acknowledgement understated radar's revolutionary impact. British technology had not merely provided tactical advantage but had transformed the nature of aerial warfare. The age of surprise attack was ending, replaced by systematic defense based on scientific detection and coordinated response. The radar towers Hitler had mocked in 1938 became the foundation of integrated air defense systems worldwide. Every modern nation adopted similar early warning networks, recognizing that air superiority required both offensive and defensive technological excellence. What's radar research dismissed by German scientists as impossible fantasy proved that scientific innovation could neutralize traditional military advantages. The invisible fortress protecting Britain demonstrated that technological superiority could defeat numerical advantage when properly applied. The Battle of Britain's outcome, determined largely by radar's tactical advantage, established precedent for technology-driven warfare that would characterize conflicts throughout the remainder of the 20th century. Scientific achievement had become as crucial as military courage. Military historians calculate that without radar guidance, fighter command's 700 aircraft could not have maintained effective defense against the Luftwaffe's 2,700 aircraft. The technological force multiplier provided by early warning and coordination proved decisive in Britain's survival. The final statistics reveal radar's strategic impact. During the Battle of Britain, German losses totaled 1,700 aircraft versus British losses of 915. More importantly, Britain preserved its fighter force while Germany exhausted its bomber fleet and experienced air crews. German bomber crews facing increasingly effective radar-guided interception developed fatalistic attitudes that degraded operational effectiveness. Knowledge that British fighters could predict German operations created psychological pressure that affected bombing accuracy and formation discipline. Conversely, British pilots gained confidence from radar support that enhanced combat performance. Fighter command pilots knew they possessed tactical intelligence advantage that gave them optimal engagement conditions. This psychological edge proved as valuable as technical superiority. The technological breakthrough that Hitler dismissed reached far beyond British shores. By 1941, the United States was implementing similar radar networks along both coasts learning from British experience. During the Battle of Britain, the attack on Pearl Harbor demonstrated what happened when radar warnings were ignored. American operators detected the incoming Japanese formations but dismissed them as returning B-17 bombers. Soviet scientists, initially skeptical of Western radar claims, rapidly developed their own systems after experiencing German air attacks. The siege of Leningrad saw primitive Soviet radar installations providing crucial early warning that helped preserve the city's defenses. Even Germany, despite Hitler's continued dismissal, began serious radar development by 1941. The Würzburg and Freyr systems, though inferior to British technology, demonstrated that German scientists understood radar's military value even when their leadership refused to acknowledge it. The radar towers that dotted Britain's coastline by 1942 numbered over 60 stations, creating an invisible net that extended 200 m into the Atlantic. This expansion allowed detection of German formations assembling over French airfields, providing even earlier warning for British defensive preparations. The integration of radar with other technologies created force multiplication effects that German planners never anticipated. British radar operators could distinguish between bomber and fighter formations based on signal characteristics, allowing precise allocation of defensive resources. Large bomber formations created stronger radar returns than fighter escorts, enabling tactical assessment before visual contact. Fighter command developed sophisticated plotting techniques that tracked individual aircraft within large formations. Experienced radar operators could estimate formation composition, flight paths, and probable targets based purely on electronic signatures. This intelligence allowed British commanders to predict German intentions and position defenses accordingly. The training of radar operators became as crucial as pilot instruction. Women's auxiliary Air Force personnel operating radar stations throughout Britain developed expertise that surpassed many male technicians. Their ability to interpret complex radar displays under combat conditions proved essential to British survival. Corporal Elizabeth Mortimer, operating radar at Dover during the heaviest German attacks, recorded her experiences. We could see them forming up over Killala, counting the formations as they assembled. By the time they crossed the channel, we knew exactly what was coming and where it was headed. The pilots called us their guardian angels. The psychological impact on German air crews intensified as radar-guided interceptions became more sophisticated. Luftwaffe formations found British fighters positioned not only to intercept but to attack from optimal angles that maximize damage while minimizing defensive response. Oberst Adolf Galland, commanding JG-26 during the Battle of Britain, reported increasing pilot stress as British interceptions became more precise. Our bomber crews faced fighters that appeared exactly where they could inflict maximum damage. The psychological pressure of knowing they were being tracked from takeoff to target degraded operational effectiveness significantly. German attempts to locate and destroy British radar stations proved largely unsuccessful. The towers, built with redundant systems and rapid repair capabilities, resumed operation within hours of attack. Moreover, the British developed mobile radar units that could replace damaged stations temporarily. The attack on radar installations required precision bombing that German crews found difficult to achieve while under fighter attack. British controllers, warned by remaining radar stations, concentrated fighters over threatened installations, making Accurate bombing nearly impossible. Operation Eagle Day Goering's attempt to destroy British radar through concentrated attacks failed completely. German formations assigned to attack radar installations faced such intense fighter opposition that most never reached their targets. Those that did achieve attacks found radar stations operational again within hours. The resilience of British radar networks demonstrated integrated planning that German intelligence had failed to appreciate. Each radar station operated independently while contributing to a coordinated defense system. Destroying individual stations degraded overall capability only marginally. British scientists meanwhile continued improving radar performance throughout the battle. Cavity magnetron development increased detection range and accuracy while reducing equipment size. These improvements allowed radar installation aboard night fighters, extending defensive capabilities to hours when German bombers hoped to operate undetected. The night fighting revolution that followed daylight defeat represented radar's ultimate vindication. British night fighters, guided by airborne radar, achieved interception rates that made night bombing as dangerous as daylight operations. German formations faced coordinated opposition regardless of weather or visibility conditions. Flight Lieutenant John Cunningham, the RAF's leading night fighter ace, achieved 39 victories using radar-guided interception techniques. Radar removed luck from night fighting. We could find German bombers in complete darkness, positioned for perfect attacks, and engage with near certainty of success. Jerry's advantage of darkness was neutralized completely. The development of radar-equipped night fighters represented technological progression that German scientists struggled to match. British cavity magnetron technology powering compact airborne radar sets remained years ahead of German developments. Night fighting became another arena where British technology dominated German tactics. By 1941, British radar technology was being shared with Allied nations, creating integrated defense networks that extended beyond British territory. Canadian and American radar stations, built with British assistance, created North Atlantic warning systems that protected convoys and coastal installations. The technology transfer represented unprecedented scientific cooperation that multiplied British defensive achievements globally. Radar networks in Australia, South Africa, and Egypt used British technology to protect Allied interests worldwide. The invisible fortress concept became an invisible empire protecting democratic nations. German intelligence finally acknowledged radar's effectiveness in classified reports written after the Battle of Britain's conclusion. Major B.O. Schmidt admitted, British detection capabilities exceeded our estimates by several orders of magnitude. Their coordination of defense through electronic means achieved tactical concentration we had not anticipated. But this belated recognition came too late to influence German strategy. Hitler's initial dismissal of radar had prevented serious German development during the crucial pre-war period. By the time German scientists achieved radar capability, British technology was generations ahead. The radar revolution, initiated by British necessity, became global standard for air defense. Every major military power developed early warning systems based on British pioneering work. The invisible fortress concept Watson what created protected free nations throughout the Cold War period. Today, modern air defense systems employ satellite detection, computer processing, and missile interception that trace their lineage to those crude metal towers Hitler dismissed in 1938. The principle remains identical. Early warning and coordinated response defeat. Surprise attack. The story of Hitler's radar blindness demonstrates how ideological prejudice can prevent recognition of revolutionary military technology. Nazi racial theories convinced German leadership that British scientists were incapable of significant innovation, a misassessment that cost German air superiority over Britain. Hitler's mockery of British radar towers reveals the danger of underestimating enemy technological capabilities. The Führer's contempt for British engineering, rooted in racial prejudice rather than technical assessment, prevented German adaptation to radar reality until British victory was assured. The radar towers that seemed so primitive to German observers in 1938 represented scientific achievement that would transform warfare permanently. Those ungainly metal structures concealed revolutionary technology that made surprise attack obsolete and integrated defense possible. The Battle of Britain proved that technological innovation could multiply defensive effectiveness beyond numerical calculations. Britain's 700 fighters, guided by radar coordination, achieved tactical concentration that defeated Germany's overwhelming numerical advantage. Hitler laughed at British radar towers in 1938, dismissing them as monuments to British desperation. By September 1940, those same towers were guiding fighters that systematically destroyed German bomber formations over England. The Führer's contempt for British technology cost Germany air superiority over Britain and ultimately contributed to Nazi defeat. The radar revolution that Hitler dismissed as impossible fantasy became the foundation of modern air defense and demonstrated that scientific achievement could determine military outcomes. In the end, Hitler's mockery of British radar proved that ideological blindness could be more dangerous than enemy action. The towers he ridiculed became invisible fortresses that protected Britain during its darkest hour and established technological precedents that would influence warfare for generations. The German bombers that were shot down by radar-guided fighters over Britain fell victim to revolutionary technology disguised as crude metal towers. Hitler's laughter at British innovation echoed across history as the sound of catastrophic miscalculation.